So here in Australia, you don't meet a lot of sober dudes. You don't meet a lot of people that are sober. And even the concept of sobriety here, it's a trip. Like sobriety itself is such a trip. I've recently been watching a lot of YouTube videos about sobriety and people that are sober and people that make that choice for themselves. And here in Australia, there aren't a lot of sober dudes. Like, so much of the culture is built around drinking and getting wasted and just wrecking yourself. And I remember growing up in high school in particular, I was straight edge. And for those of you, I'll give you a quick rundown of what it is. Straight edge is essentially a lifestyle where you choose or you make a commitment to not drink, to not smoke, to not do drugs. And if you want to go hardline with it, you can also add like no coffee, no, no cane sugar, no sex outside of a committed relationship, and things like that. Obviously, you can extrapolate it further and further. It's just about your like level of dedication to yourself and your commitment to yourself. But anyways, I was straight edge in high school, and I was in this committed relationship, and I made this commitment to not drink. And after like it would be after well over a year, I was already straight edge. After well over a year, I was peer pressured every single party, and we would go out and party every single weekend. Like, it's the weekend, new party. It was that sort of vibe. Like, go out and hang out with a bunch of drunk people till 4 in the morning every weekend. I mean, that's just high school in general, right? I'm not the only, like, that experience is not unique to me. But it got to a point where there was this, hang on, I'll just show you for a second. When I was 16, I got my first tattoo, was this straight edge tattoo right there, that straight edge X. And then recently, my amazing tattoo artist like added the flaming dice around it and stuff like that. But yeah, it got to a point where my girlfriend at the time was like, you could just tell that she was not happy with me not drinking. And I loved not drinking, but to her, it was like a party. It's that party mindset, you know. Some people, they need to be partying. Some people need to be out, drinking, and they need to get that out of their system. She basically made me choose between her and drinking, or continue down my sobriety, my path of sobriety, my straight edge, and not have her. And so reluctantly, at the time, like it was an easy choice. I was like, obviously I'm gonna choose my girlfriend. But looking back, and like I don't hold it against her, I don't hold anything against her. Like, she was a beautiful girl, and that relationship didn't end well. I mean, what high school relationships do end well? But I still look back on that time, like that time of my life, pretty fondly. I look back on it with a lot of affection, and I'm able to look at it with a lot of grace as well. But if I could go back in time, I would choose to stay sober, because I don't have a lot of personal experience with like drinking and getting fucked up, or whatever it is, whatever the term the kids are using nowadays. That's just not me. Like, I've always been a sober guy, I've always had that sort of mindset of like, oh, why do people drink? Like, what? It's to fill a void, right? It's to fill a void. And I can't remember who said it, but I heard it when I was a kid. And it was about everyone having this God-sized hole in their heart. And once Australia became more secular, and that sort of happened with, I would say, my parents' generation, the Gen X's, that our generation especially, the millennials, we're super secular, non-religious types. And I'm not speaking about me personally, but I'm just speaking about the generation. We've got this God-sized hole in our hearts, and if you don't go to church, or if you don't practice a faith and fill that with something to believe in, we panic and we try and fill it with whatever we have available to us. And that's often alcohol, it's often cannabis, it's often video games, any food, even food, like food especially, because food is very accessible, food is relatively cheap, and a food addiction, food is everywhere. So it's an easy addiction to sort of take. But I remember hearing that when I was a kid, that about that God-sized hole in our hearts. And I've carried that with me for so long. Like, that as a concept has been with me for more years than I can think of. And I always touch back on that. I always muse about how each of us, we have this path we walk in. We've got all these obstacles we've got to overcome. And I just don't have that like addictive personality. I don't have that thing in me that says I need to fill that hole. And some people maybe they don't have that at all, and they just like going out and drinking, and they like going out and getting fucked up with their friends. And like, I'm not judging you for that, because like there was a brief period in my teenage years where I did that too. Like, I'm not perfect, but again, I don't have a huge pool of experience of like personally consuming shit to pull from. But I've been a bartender for more years than I can count, eh? And I've seen a lot of things. I've bartended at nightclubs, I've bartended at clubs, bars, pubs, hotels, you name it, I've bartended for it. I've ran the bar at like local events, you know. Last year's Winter Festival, I bartended for that, and I had a beautiful experience running the bar for that. For the I think it was called the Long Lunch, out in out near Nicholson, near the vineyards and the Nicholson River. Beautiful area. It's like a boating hotspot, and like if you know the Gippsland Lakes and if you know Victoria, you'll sort of know what I'm talking about. But I've had a lot of experience around alcohol, but just not so much drinking it myself. I've always been a sober dude, and you pick up on people's drinking habits really quickly. And again, I'm not like coming from this like judgmental space. Like, I'm not judging people, but bartending, you really learn. Like, people never go out for one drink. People never go out for two drinks. If people go out, they're drinking 10 drinks. They're going to have 10 drinks. And that's especially true of like young men here in Australia. Like, I observe so many young men, just they'll spend $150, $200 just at my venue drinking. And I take for granted like, I try not to take for granted my sobriety, and also the fact of the money I'm saving by not drinking. Like, this is going to make me sound incredibly lame, but I don't care, man. I just own who I am. I've got like a sparkling water addiction, like bubbly. It's never the stuff with the sugar. It's always just like the sparkling water, with the natural essence. Like, that does me fine. Like, I love that stuff so much. Like, and I always see the Americans on YouTube or on Reddit or wherever. I always see them posting like they've got LaCroix, they've got Polar, they've got Spindrift. There's all these amazing brands that are producing this sparkling water. Whereas here in Australia, there's like two main players that I gravitate towards, and then there's one that's like my backup water if there's nothing else available. So you've got bubbly, and then you've got the Schweppes sparkling mineral water, and both of those are very effervescent. And then you've got Mount Franklin lightly sparkling, and those cans are always on sale, but because they're lightly sparkling, I don't gravitate towards them. I love that fizz, I love the effervescence, and I need that. But that's sort of my thing. If I'm going out to like a gig, if I'm going to a hardcore show or a metal show or a punk show, my vice is soda water with a wedge of lime, so I'm fun, man. I'm so fun. But you notice like people's drinking habits so much, and I'm not judging them for it. But in Australia, it's brutal for those sober dudes. It's brutal for the people that are choosing sobriety. And I've got a lot of respect for anyone that may not even go sober, but they acknowledge their relationship with alcohol. And the alcohol industry, they want you to have that relationship with alcohol. They want to, they wouldn't exist if it weren't for people and their drinking habits. And it's a fine rope. It's a fine rope to walk, because you can teeter over one side. You can fall into that camp where it's like alcohol becomes your life and your vice, and you've got this like spiritual malaise, like I said, that God-sized hole in your heart, and then you replace that with your alcohol, or whatever, man. It doesn't have to just be alcohol. Like, I recently watched a Hamish Patterson video, who you may know as like the bowl cut guy or anything, but I've been watching that dude for years, and he's like such an inspiration, eh? And he talks about alcoholism not being about alcohol at all. It could be anything, like any sort of substance, any sort of addiction can still be alcoholism. And that point really resonated with me, because it just goes back to that, having that hole in your heart in your life. And if you don't fill it with something like love, if you don't fill it with something, it gets filled with a vice. And I hope going forwards, people, develop a better relationship with their vices, because it's so easy to just spiral. And, I've been in, beautiful relationships with beautiful people where things have happened and you can see that spiral. And I'm not going to like name names or anything, but one of my more recent relationships, sort of something happened, and something like related to addiction happened, and I just noticed, like, it wasn't at the time that I noticed the change, but after the event occurred, looking back with like that hindsight, hindsight is 2020, as they always say. Looking back, you can recognize how insidious addiction really is. You can recognize just the harm it really does to people, and when it's right in your face, when you're like looking at it head on, face to face, it doesn't seem that threatening. You don't even really see it for what it is. It isn't until later on, when you look back, when practice a little mindfulness, when you look back and you're able to recognize just how bad it really was. And maybe I'll go into that a little more in the future, because it's like, when you're talking about other people's lives, even if they were like such a huge part of your life, you still don't really want to overstep a line. And I reckon way earlier on in my YouTube channel, like, I remember like a couple of years ago, I went through this like bad breakup, and like I wasn't spewing hatred or anything, but I started talking about things that I probably at that time shouldn't have been talking about, but we'll go into that another day. So I want to know from you guys, what are your experiences with addictions? What are your experiences with alcoholism even? Like, do you recognize your relationship with alcohol? And for any of the sober people that like watch my content, like, let me know. Like, I don't talk to enough sober people, and I love talking to sober people, because they can sort of see things from my perspective. They don't have that sort of confirmation bias. They don't have that sort of recency bias about their own habits to like cloud their judgment. So if you've got any opinions, if you've got any thoughts on the matter, let me know. I can't wait to hear from you guys. And until the next video, my name is Aussie Marcel. Thank you for giving me a platform here. Thank you for allowing me to talk. And if you get to this point, thanks for listening. Until the next one, I'll catch you guys around.